Hello there. I'm Sharon Little. I'm one of the Music for People musicianship and leadership grads here. I'm here tonight with Tim Simmons in another series of conversations with the presenters at our upcoming SummerBreeze Music Fest coming up June 12th. It is online. And you have in that session, that full day session, an opportunity to take part in 17 different sessions. We are open to anyone of any ability. And I'm just trying to give everybody a little bit of a taste test, a little bit of a sampling of what different sessions may involve. So Tim, welcome. So good to talk to you. It's always good to see you.
Sharon, thank you.
We haven't done this for a while.
You know, it's so funny. I looked at I get the emails for SummerBreeze and I was like, ooh. And then I was looking at it like, oh man, this looks so good. I think I might sign up for it. And then I saw my name and I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
I'm it does look good too, doesn't it?
I was like, oh man.
Can hardly wait. Did I get the early bird? Oh, I missed the early bird.
Yeah, and I was like, whoops, maybe I should prepare what I'm going to do. Wait, what am I doing on there?
Yeah, so let's talk about what you're going to do. So you are a drummer and obviously a guitar player, and your guitar playing is great, but primarily you're a drummer and English teacher. But what's really particular is that you work in a small school with kids who learn differently. And so you've been working for 15 years at bringing neurological studies. You've gone and done the research for your master's. You've bringing that neurology knowledge and the MFP games into what you do with the kids, and you've adapted and changed so that it's true that what you do is available for everybody, and yet it's also really great for kids who learn differently, who may not fit into the typical school. So
yes. Yeah.
Tell us what some of the things that you've done.
Well, the story is that I was an English teacher for 23 years. And started working in a long time ago, really, with inner city kids in Philadelphia, where I live. And before my kids were born, I was still gigging a lot. And at the time, I was teaching English at a high school in Philadelphia. And somebody I worked with saw me play a gig somewhere and said, hey, have you ever thought about teaching the kids here to play the drums? And I was like, well, I don't know. That's kind of like what I do for me, you know? And so that was how it started. And and I realized that what I was seeing in the English classroom was reflected in what I was seeing on the drum line with these kids. And then I just kind of fortuitously fell into this job working with students with learning differences where I teach now at a school outside Philly. And it's funny because when I went to interview for the job, I interviewed to teach English. And the head of the school who did the interview said, well, you know, the reason we pulled your resume is because you teach drums. And did you know that drumming is really good for reading? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. And that was how I got the job, on the condition that I would start something at the school. So yeah, so now I'm a full-time music teacher at the school. And really, the process has been looking for ways to it started as like, how do I teach music, and how do I teach music to kids with learning differences? So I work with students who have dyslexia, mostly ADHD, really severe ADHD, dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, executive function disorder. Those are the four biggies. So most of us know what dyslexia is. Dyslexia is an impairment in the way we process language. ADHD is when we focus on too much. So we have a hard time it's kind of figuring out what to focus on. So, you know, the ADD kids are, you know, they're just looking at everything all the time. Auditory processing delay is a delay in how we process what we hear. And executive function is a frontal lobe thing where we struggle with materials management, time management, those kinds of things. So those are the kinds of students that I work with. And when I kind of started teaching music to them, when it kind of came like, all right, well, I think we're going to start a music program, because there was no music program. I just Googled, how do you teach music to kids with dyslexia? And at the time, there was nothing. I couldn't find anything. I mean, there really was nothing. There were some people. There was the Hubicki color staff, and there were little things happening in the UK with like choral programs, but nothing like really kind of codified around how do you work with these kids. So that's what eventually led me to improvisation and music for people. And so my process has been, okay, well, so what if, since I kind of fell backwards into teaching music, and nobody's really kind of, for younger kids, really kind of figured out like, well, what's the process for this? What if I did it? And what if, and I'm sure other people have, but I couldn't find them. So I thought, all right, well, so I'm not going to read any textbooks. I'm going to just start from square one. And what if I just improvised with these students? I mean, that was really how it started. Is we're going to come into the classroom, I'm going to use music for people techniques, and I'm going to improvise. Jim Oshinsky was really instrumental. Julie Weber was really instrumental in helping me kind of like, all right, well, let's come up with a kind of some structure, like let's narrow it down. And in kind of in the beginning, and really my thing was like everything out the window. We're gonna get some drums and some buckets. I've got a piano. Some parents donated some instruments. Let's go. And so that was how it started. And yeah, so like the past 15, 16 years has been really just drilling down and drilling down and drilling down till essentially what I have now is a really kind of codified sequential curriculum. I think of it more as like a guidebook. That really is based in some of this neurology, some of this neurobiology of improvisation that you mentioned that I researched, based in music for people concepts. But also I've tried to be really strict with myself about aligning things with national standards and Common Core standards for music, so that, I want to make sure we're ticking off the boxes of like, well, so that if our students decide I took Tim's class, I have some kids from 1st grade through 12th grade. And so when they come through, I want to be able, if they say, I want to pursue music, there are still some things that have to be checked off, right? And so how can we get it in such a way? And so, I've got myself to the point now where it's still pretty no rules over here, very free, but there is a hardcore sequence and some pretty clearly defined competencies that I'm expecting the students to be able to demonstrate by the time they get out. So that's the long path.
And that's so that, I mean, all kinds of questions come up from that. But so now I've been with, just for those listening, I've been with Music for People for 30 years now. So and we have these really core activities. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that those are the ones that you really transferred. Could you talk about, and maybe let's demo one or two of the MFP games that we play that you've adapted, and let's just do a little play.
Well, so for the big one for me is solo over ostinato. Cool. So there's a funny story, because I kept thinking, well, I can't use that terminology with my students, solo over ostinato. And I did for a long time, but explaining what does solo mean, what is an ostinato, you just get mired in the weeds. And really, I'm a talker, and I'll just talk the kids' ears off. And they're off in their happy place, and I'm talking about what an ostinato is. So Todd Rogers one time referred to that form as the hooker, that you make a hook and you repeat the hook. And so I thought, well, that's great. That's what I'm going to call it. So for like a year or two with my students, I said, we're going to play the hooker. Until finally a student said to me, a student I was really close with too, said, Tim, the students at my school call us by our first name. Tim, it might be a little bit more appropriate if you called it the fish hook instead of the hooker. And I was like, that's true. You have to stop being a better person than me. Yeah. So then I called it the fish hook. So for years, I called it the fish hook, till finally explaining really what a hook is, right? It's a repeating pattern, which we'll get into. But so finally one student said, you're calling it the fish hook, but it's not a fish hook. It's an infinity loop. You want me to play a loop for infinity. And so that's what I call it now, the infinity loop. And so this is how I started. So we can use our tabletops.
Good. Okay.
So the way I begin it is um, we work in groups of four. Although often sometimes we'll start with duets, but we can get into this. But um, and we start with a pulse.
Okay.
Now there's going to be a delay over Zoom, I know,
Yeah,
but
we
you
all
know.
know the Zoom delay.
And so we kind of establish a pulse, right? And get the students really. We do a lot of work with like, how do you feel the pulse? Put the pulse in your body, move your body. We do a lot of body movement, especially with my younger age students. So they have some practice with like what parts of your body to move. How do you move your body? Um, and then I use Orff xylophones for this the first time we do it
Oh,
in the
great. Yeah.
classroom. What I tell one student is to play a 4-note repeating pattern, any 4 notes. Now, when I say this to them, what I say to them is start with one sound, right? I'll turn my camera
Yeah.
so you can
Let's
see me talking.
keep it up at your face so we
See
can
my
hear what we know
socks.
what the hell's yeah.
Start with one sound,
Da,
right?
da,
Now
da,
add another sound.
da, 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 da,
Now
da,
add a
da.
third sound
Da 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 dum da da
and a fourth
da
sound.
da 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 ba da
And now
do
just
da
repeat that.
da do da da do
And
da
everyone else is just
da
moving their body to
do
this
da
pulse.
da
And you're
do
going to
da
do that loop for
da
infinity now.
do da
So breathe
do da
and
da
remember to smile.
do da da
Now,
do
as
da
the person who's going to
da
join in,
do da
I have two
da
choices.
do da da
I
do
can
da
copy
da
or
do
add something new. And each person who enters the improvisation has that choice. Copy or add something new. Real simple language. I'm going to add something. Doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. And we just kind of groove like this for a while until somehow we find a way to end together. Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. So the structure is really simple. Start with one sound, add another sound, and another until you have four. And I like that kind of even bar of four.
Yeah.
And then repeat that, and then copy or add something new. Find a way to end. That's it.
So that when we're working, and I'm just saying for people doing their classes on Zoom. So I've been hosting Friday night grad lounges for over a year now on Zoom, and we have found absolutely every way Zoom does not work to making music together. Zoom has improved, and we have also improved in how we interact. So we realize there are certain things we can do that work really well on Zoom and certain things that don't. Duets like this work really well, and we can
Yeah.
actually do harmony. We found quartets are a little more challenging because the latency keeps increasing. So if you were doing, if someone, a teacher were watching this and wanted to do it with their class, they could have this duet, try a trio maybe. But I think this would be a really great one for starting with the loop, and then as I've got this loop going, that at some point I'm listening to what you're doing and I change one thing. So
Mm-hmm.
my loop shifts
Mm-hmm.
and that gives you something else. And we can go back and have a shifting loop
Yeah. So
back and forth in duets.
right. Yeah. So really, well, kind of two things that I have to say to that. One is because I work with special needs populations, I've been fortunate in the sense in that I haven't had to do too much over Zoom.
Yeah,
Because I've been because my students need to be in the classroom.
right.
And so, but you're right. Yeah.
So
So,
we just have to, as we do these, Tim, so I'll just think, okay, how do we adapt this on Zoom from what
yeah.
I know is working?
Yeah.
And as we get back into in person,
Yeah.
just so for those of you who are watching, duets we found working, and we can actually, with two people, actually we can kind of keep the sound together. When you get four people, it's a little bit different. When you get 8 or 9 people, it's much better than it was, but
Yeah.
it's tough to keep that beat. So two people on Zoom, absolutely. You might want to try after they've experimented with two to add a third person,
Yeah.
maybe a fourth, because yeah. Cool.
And in a hybrid classroom, I have been working in a hybrid classroom all year with some students on Zoom, some students in the classroom. So we've been using Clean Feed to help with some of the latency, although
Yeah.
Zoom has improved to the point where we haven't really used it a lot. And inviting students to join in I tell them what's the part of the improvisation that you're really locking into and play along with that. And so,
And that's a
but
good listening skill, particularly, for kids who have attention difficulties or challenges. Okay, find one sound you really love
right, and lock into that.
and lock
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, so that infinity loop is the third step in a larger process
Yeah.
that begins with what I call one authentic sound, which is one quality sound. And that's the first day of class is one authentic sound. And what does that mean and how to make it? And that goes into an exercise that I call the charm bracelet, where we're stringing sounds together in like charms on a bracelet. And so we're just experimenting with stringing sounds together. We're not worried about groove. We're not worried too much about repetition, but we're experimenting as a class with stringing sounds together. Some students are really open with their voices. Most students are not. So I'm pretty gentle about that.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of bells and happy drums and Orff xylophones, buckets, drums, and then the charm bracelet leads us into the infinity loop. And then once we have kind of mastered this, okay, and what I tell them when we do the infinity loop is do not change. And this is because I'm working with students with processing delays, right? And who need to be able to hear the same thing over and over and over again. It's going to take them a few minutes before they've even really heard the melody. But once we kind of get that down and they can lock into that, and truthfully, a good MFP improvisation goes for what, 2 minutes? These with our students will sometimes go for 15 or 20 because that's what they need to lock in. So like I'm there with a cowbell, like kunk, kunk, just trying to get them to lock into the pulse and imitate or copy what they hear. But once we kind of have mastered that, the next structure is Catch Me If You Can. And Catch Me If You Can is what you said, where you're going to get bored of playing the same thing. So what happens if the first person changes? And when you hear that change, how do you respond to that change? And this is where, if you really want to geek out, we can really drill down at some of that neurologic stuff that's happening. Because, can you synchronize with the pulse? Can you hear the melody? And then can you respond to the changes in that melody? And
it's
there
really
is,
complex.
your brain is like going, blah, when you hear all that,
Yeah. And I was just thinking with the, let me just go back. Where was I? When I was talking to David Rudge this morning, and he was talking about when he was working with his university students, some of whom are music majors, some of whom are not. And he gets them going, they start with drumming and just getting a pulse going and getting some kind of groove going. And he said, and this is all about entrainment and really sinking in and getting out of your head, really getting out of that thinking part and that busy part that's wondering what else is going, and then just sinking. And it's almost a physical sensation I felt when I realized, okay, I've dropped in.
Yeah.
And now the whole group is in a pulse. And he says with those kids, so it can take 40 minutes.
Yes.
The first time. Because they start that relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that, especially with the population of students that I'm working with, there are some instances, especially with my lower schoolers, my first through fifth graders that I work with. It will take weeks just to get them to, when I play this pulse on the drum, you play it too, and I have signals that I use, like this is aliens, is, stop and listen, or Mohawk or whatever it is they kind of decide for the day. But like when you see me doing this, like my hands aren't on the drum anymore, and you don't hear the drum, you see me doing this, but when you can see the wave of delay that's happening. The other thing to consider too is like for a kid with ADHD, typically, as far as cognition is concerned, there's a delay of about 2 years. So a 10th grade student is really processing at an 8th grade level. My seniors are processing at a 10th grade level. And so you also have to take that into account. And so it's really, I mean, luckily, I could play drums all day long. That's my whole goal in life has been to, I just,
I can
literally,
just play drums
yeah,
all day.
that's all I've ever wanted to do,
Yeah.
ever. So I am perfectly happy to hit a drum for, hours at a time. And luckily I love doing that.
Right.
That's what they need though. That is what
Yep.
they need. Um,
And
yeah.
it's that,
And
and that rhythm just well entrains them into a pulse, and
yeah.
I often find, and I go for walking. I mean, and this isn't. I think this is true for everyone or many people anyway, whether there are learning differences or not. When I walk in the morning, that walking rhythmicizes my
Yeah.
body. It
Hmm.
puts my body into, everyone talks about this. It clears the mind. It gets my
Hmm.
body into a pattern. So this is really, applicable right through the whole curriculum, no matter what. Everyone, and particularly with the distractibility, with our goldfish-like attention span,
Yeah.
to have something steady like that and learn to and train to that. So, hey, so I can actually sit down and concentrate and read a freaking book,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. And so, yeah, and you hit a couple of good things too. Like, part of one of the things that I've realized over the course of this whole experience through Music for People, through the work that I do, through a lot of the writing that I do, is that this is not an LD thing. And that this works very well with LD students, absolutely. But it can expand out. And I actually have a guidebook that I've created. I'm hoping to publish that has some stories that go along with it. And really, my audience is not an LD. Not only for that, it's for
That's right.
parents.
Yeah.
It's for mainstream teachers who just want to dip into this. Because what we're trying to do is center down to the most core principles of who we are and what our voice is and how do we find our voice. And for me, for I'm where I care about all that brain stuff. I care about national standards. That's great. But at the end of the day, I want my students to be able to say, I made that. I said that. You
I
know?
think that is absolutely is, and let's just really, like, breathe that in for a minute, because as teachers, who may be coming to any of the workshops we offer, there, teachers have, like, it's a make and take kind of thing. Okay, what can I do on Monday with kids?
Yeah.
Because
Hmm.
I've,
Right.
and really, what Music for People is, what you're talking about, what we're really about is about presencing who we are
Yeah.
and really making the inner outer connections, that
Hmm.
inner pulse, that inner self, and that inner self is expressed more fully and authentically and completely and mindfully outside.
Yes.
And Music for People is often, we talk about it as being mindfulness through music, or music and mindfulness.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that is um, that, first of all, that music has meaning when it has an audience.
Mm.
And this is a skill that I work with a lot of my students. How do you be an audience? Be an audience. So I never tell them be quiet. I tell them be an audience. Are you an audience right now? Be an audience. And what does that mean? And sometimes it means cheering. Sometimes it means running over to the drum and playing along because you can't resist. Sometimes it means getting up and doing that goofy dance that nobody wants you to do. Sometimes it means sitting and listening and sending. I tell them, send them your positive vibes, because they're putting themselves out there. So send them your vibes, and that's really what being an audience means. And so we're not only looking inside ourselves and listening and finding that way to express ourselves, but then also being a receptacle for others and
Right.
responding to that. And that builds community, it builds confidence, it builds identity, I have students who like carry their drumsticks around school,
Mm.
because they're like so excited because I told them they were a drummer, and that becomes who they are. And I can totally relate to that. That was very important to me when I
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
kid, and
And there's a
for a kid who's been told you're never going to go to college, you're not going to be able
yep,
because you can't read, to have something that they can say, I did that, I can do this, um, and to know, the research really tells us that training in one area impacts performance in others. And so
absolutely.
your ability to synchronize with the beat, your ability to perceive melody, these are two things that are intimately related to how we process language, to how we read, and to how we perform in a classroom. And so it's just a win-win all around. And I get to play drums all day.
Right, right.
It's awesome.
And what it's like,
It's
oh
all
my
about me
God.
and what
I
I
mean,
want.
really, yeah, it's all about me. I get to play drums all day.
Yeah,
So
ultimately,
it's
that's
all
the goal. It's yes,
so
yes.
that you can have your inner self express fully outwardly into
Yeah,
have that all
yeah.
connected. You can drum all day.
Yeah, blah
Well,
blah blah blah. Shut up, Tim. Let me play the drums.
blah blah blah. So that's our new mantra. That's the new the added mantra because David Darling. I've been talking about David Rudge this morning, but David Darling was a talker as well and
Yeah,
a philosopher, and he would talk and then he would catch himself. He was a teacher as well,
yeah,
and then he'd go blah blah blah. Let's play.
yeah.
Blah blah blah
Blah
blah.
blah blah.
Okay, let's remember. So one
Yes.
of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about the being the audience and the performer, came back actually again to this conversation I had with David because David and I are both qigong tai chi practitioners,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a stance, mabu, horse stance, which is, your feet are somewhat far apart and you are kind of squatted down, back is still straight. Your legs are going to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
There's tension, there's solidity, there's steadiness. And yet the top of the body has to be able to be soft.
Huh.
And Tai Chi and Qigong is that ongoing, strong, soft, loud, quiet,
Yeah.
yin, yang,
Yeah.
forward, go and make a drum sound and participate, sit in quiet and listen and give that. And that's your participation. And when you're sitting in horse stance, both parts have to work together. If the top of your body and the bottom of your body are stiff, somebody can knock you over with a feather.
Yeah.
But so it's this ongoing flow, ebb and flow of balance and I noticed that that's so much part of the MFP
Yeah.
life.
Well,
It's
and that's crossover too. Like I love that, in education there one of
I
the
know.
things that drives me crazy as a teacher is like catchphrases and fads.
Yeah, okay.
You
Yep,
know, and
cliches. Yep, I'm
and
right with you.
so, there's always something new. So, and it's hard to keep up with.
Yep.
But ultimately, best practices remain best practices, and there's a continuity through them. There's a thread through them all, whatever we're calling them. But this idea of cross-curricular connections, and teachers we're always looking for ways to, how can I connect this to math, and how can I bring these all together. And really, for me, one of the big ways is just the beauty of metaphor. Because do you remember when you did this? What did that feel like in your body? And so we talk about that a lot. Like, let's talk about what sound we'll record. I have a couple of orchestra mics hanging from the ceiling, and so the room is always wired to record. And so I'll record, and we have a big recording light that somebody gave the school. So I'll turn it on, like we're recording now, and then we'll listen back. And it's so funny because the recording is unforgiving.
That's right.
you know? And they'll be like, "That was amazing. Let's listen back to it." And they're like, "Oh my God, is that what we sounded like?" And yeah, that's what you sounded like. But that's okay because
Yeah,
dirty means you're learning,
yeah,
And
exactly.
so messy is good. But so let's talk about what we hear and what did it feel like?
But
What
they
did you
can
hear?
hear what they sound, and
Yeah,
they can listen critically and in a thinking way. They can think
yeah,
about what they've which they would not have been able to do before.
yeah.
So
And what
listen,
were you feeling when you were making that sound?
yeah,
Like what did that feel like? This is what reality was, right? The recording is what was reality, but what were you feeling while you said that? While you were playing that? And then how can you tap into that feeling? Like, where did you feel that in your body? Did you feel it in your back? Did you feel it in your head? Were your knees moving? Were you tapping your feet? Like, tap back into that, because the feeling is what's going to lead you. The messiness that's a technique issue. We can fix the technique. That's easy,
Yeah.
you know? But the feeling is what you can't teach, you know? And so,
It's on an experience.
you know, and I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, we made this music together, and it sounded really pretty, or it sounded really great. We were really rocking out, because I heard what somebody said and I added to that, you know, and that generalizes to so much else, you know, of what we do in other classrooms,
Yeah.
of, you know, well, I don't want to get into the weeds
Yeah.
of it, but that's an idea that generalizes, and it's so simple, you know. And that you can learn that just by tapping on a bucket with someone, you know, is really powerful.
Best things are so simple.
Yeah.
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 So listen, Tim, as we close up here, if for people who are coming to the workshop, um, maybe thinking about coming into the musicianship and leadership program, even coming for the first time into an MFP workshop, for you, what, you know, because they'll come in, if they've never done anything like this, it's like, I don't know, you know, but,
Yeah.
you know, what, and we all went through that.
Yeah.
We all went through that at least once or twice, or, you know, for a year or so.
I will never forget my first MFP workshop.
I don't know.
Blew my mind.
You know, mine was 30 whatever years ago.
Yeah.
Not, you know,
Like,
and I still remember the time in 1997 that I actually was in the second year of the pro. It took me that long to drop into actually being real in my music, when I could feel it. It was that physical sensation. So for you, Tim, what has music for people and that training meant to you in your teaching and just who you are?
um, well, like I really, well, I keep coming back to one authentic sound, one quality sound. That to me, um, is the heart of, what MFP really means to me. Um,
What does that really mean to you? That one quality sound, and because it may be new, you know, we're all going to get to it, but it may be
yeah.
new for people.
For me personally, um, it's how I create, and that at any given moment in time, and this is something I tell my students too. In fact, it's one of my mantras I have it hanging on the wall, that all music begins with one authentic sound. Say it over and over again. And that at any given point in time, all you're responsible for is one sound. Find one sound. And now it's important. Music, this is the beginning of music. It's not the whole of music, but it's the beginning. But this is something that, you know, W.A. Matthews says there's not a lot to learn, but it takes a lifetime to learn it. You're only responsible for one sound. It could take, you know, I know it's taken me years to really understand what that means. But for me personally, in my own daily playing and my own daily practice in music that I've created, and in recent years I've been like really recording a ton of music, and like I play a bunch of different instruments. But all of that is because I begin with one sound, and I just start there. There was someone who was in one of my early MFP workshops, and he was one of those people who was like in and out. I never saw him again, so I don't remember his name. It was a long time ago. Um, but he played the flute. And I said, how long have you been playing the flute? This was my first workshop, and I was really just a drummer at the time. And he said, well, not really that long. I got this flute at a yard sale. And I was like, what? Like, you bought a, I don't understand. Like, how do you just buy a flute at a yard sale and then, like, what's happening right now? And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, how'd you do that? And he said, well, I figured out how to make one sound on the flute. And for a long time, that was all I could do. I just made one sound. And then eventually I figured out how to make two sounds. And then I was like having fun because I was going back and forth between my two sounds. And then I figured out how to make three sounds. And the more sounds I made, it got easier and easier and easier. And so that was for me. I was like that, like a bell went off, and I realized, well, I could play any instrument I want to play by that logic, right? That the instrument's just a tool. The music is in me, you know, and so that for me is what's so powerful, and that I still use. In fact, just today, I mean, I have a wave drum. It's like an electronic drum,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and a looper pedal. And so I brought it in because we're kind of towards the end and we're just kind of doing goofy stuff to just for fun the last few days of school. And so I had my looper going and the wave drum, and I handed sticks to a kid and said, all right, add something to the loop. I'll work the pedal. You add something. Spin. You turn the knob, find a cool sound, add something. And he said, well, I don't know how to play this thing. And I said, I didn't ask you to play it. Find one sound. You know, like you're not playing the wave drum. You're finding a sound. What sound sounds cool to you? And then hit it, you know, that's it. And so that to me is really what speaks to me. And that kind of philosophically and ideologically is how I teach. And I think anything that I've created over the course of the past 15 years or so has been kind of that as its core principle. Like, well, let's just start here. It's the one thing I know I can do, you know. And now, okay, and now so I'm just going to do that until I figure out the second thing that I can do, you know.
And that is probably a perfect place to end, because really, what more can be said?
Yeah,
What more can be said? And I'll just, I mean, yeah, there's nothing. The only thing I'll add is I've found two.
I have one more thing to say.
What I will say about the flute, I get the flute at the garage. I've got one. A friend brought me a flute that she found in a dumpster in Italy.
uh,
No, in New York City, and the other one I bought at a pawn shop.
oh wow, yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the MFP thing, right? We all have these
Yeah,
rooms where
that's
we're surrounded. I've got like all my instruments all over the
no.
place, you know.
We have that's the other thing. If you start coming to music for people workshops, you think you're a flute player, you're a clarinet player. Got news for you. You're going to start getting all of these,
Yeah,
you're going to be looking through garbage pails and rummage sales for the
yeah,
little kids' toy and so on.
yeah. Be warned, I have 3 accordions.
So one authentic sound and a whole pile of laughter. Tim,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I'm looking forward
Oh,
to that.
thank
Are you
you.
registered? This has been fun. I always enjoy talking to you because we can get into the neurology and the psychology and that learning stuff that I love so much. But mostly, I got such admiration for what you've done with taking the Music for People materials into these settings and finding wonderful, extraordinary ways to work with everyone. And I so appreciate that and love that.
Oh,
So
thank
we'll
you.
see
Thank
you
you so much for
all.
doing this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I get to have these cool conversations with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So my friends, we've got SummerBreeze Music Fest. As Tim said, it's going to be exciting. He can hardly wait to see what it's going to be about.
And I'm going to be there.
And so it's on June 12th. We are recording. Please register at musicforpeople.org. And Tim, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
we'll see you on goodbye. We'll see you on the 12th.
All right. See you, Sharon.